Welcome back to the hang gliding files. Today's part 2 in a series of virtual reality hang gliding. So we're going to concentrate on controls today. What you see here with the pilot and the glider moving in unison like that, that's not real. That never happens in real life. What really happens is the glider moves around the center of gravity created by the pilot, and the pilot basically remains stationary as he's pulled down by gravity, and the glider moves around that point of center of gravity, so in and out, back and forth. And that has to be simulated in real life. And the way that that's being done in virtual reality is either with the joystick or with the hand controllers. And so as you watch the videos as we go through here, you can see like a normal pilot, the pilot and the airplane remain in constant sync, and what changes is the movement of the controller. In hang gliding, that's not true. The pilot remains basically constant and the glider moves around him, and he's moving his hands to control his position relative to the glider. And in virtual hang gliding, the controllers represent your hands, and it is a representation of how your hands are related to your head. So imagine a triangle between your two hands and your head, and that is telling the simulator how to control the glider. And in real life hang gliding, this position is everywhere. It can be above your head, it can be all the way to your waist. In this example, on arrow towing. So all of these types of relative in free space conditions exist in real life and have to be simulated in a hang gliding simulation. Okay, here we are at a ridge soaring site in TFFE, and watch how the pilot's movements affect the glider, and it doesn't take very much to make the glider move, and this is because this wind is very stable and smooth right here, that all of the control movements you see on the glider are affected by the pilot and his weight shift. Okay, now we're going to move into a first-person view of how the control works, and in these sequences, imagine this is what you're going to see at yourself as you're flying a hang glider, and what it is that you really do. And what you do is you look around, you're paying attention to pretty much everything outside of the glider and not what's in the glider. But imagine yourself, if you were doing this, that the way that you're making the glider move and control and turn is the relative position of your hands as you're sitting relative to your head. And to make all of these turns, you're going to have to move. The only thing that moves is going to be your hands, and those have the controllers in them. So just imagine that and how that would feel as you're watching some of these videos. So as we go through these videos, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm playing around with realism settings like clouds and wind and other scenarios. So kind of pay attention to that as we go through. There's a lot of different things that you can set up in TFFE that really add to realism. I hope that comes across. And another thing to note from just the visual perspective, this recording is just a recording of what the right eye sees. It's not the actual view that would be seen in VR. It's actually very, very three-dimensional and very lifelike to look around and see depth and 3D perspective. That doesn't really come across in videos because you're only looking at it in one eye view and you don't see the 3D depth. And here's a really good example of just catching a thermal inside the simulator. The simulated thermals in TFFE are excellent, very realistic. It's got edges, gusts on the side, turbulence. Sizing is right, strength seems to be right. Very nice. Another very cool thing about TFFE is the addition of these artificially intelligent drone pilots, as they were. You can launch as many as you want, and they go out and they fly around, and it's very fun to fly with them. And they're great thermal indicators and add greatly to the realism. This is just a few pilots, but I've flown with 10 times that many pilots in a gaggle. So it's great to see that this type of interaction is going to be a part of virtual hang gliding. As we interact with other pilots and other elements in the environment, this really just points out that when you're flying a hang glider, the vast majority of your focus is external to the glider. So watch as I'm flying with other pilots where my vision goes to. What am I looking at? I'm not looking out the front. I'm not looking at the variometer. I'm looking at either the hill or the nearby pilots or whatever. But the focus is always external. And as you're doing that, you're moving your head and looking in different directions and looking at different things, the underlying control mechanism of your relative position of your hands to your head remains the same. And so this becomes kind of a spatial problem in that you have to maintain a proper relative position of both hands to each other and to your head, even though you're moving around and you're doing different things and you're changing. It's not a visual issue, it's a spatial issue. In all of these flights, I'm actually not using the hand controllers. I don't have real good control over them yet. I am using a joystick. So in this sequence of basically a glide that I'm watching from a third person, think to yourself, what of the pilot movements are being induced by me using a control joystick, or which ones are being implemented by the environment on the glider? And see if you can tell which is which, because they look identical. Here's where I take my hand off the joystick and reach to get the controller so that I can change a setting, because all of the buttons are on the controller. The glider goes into a turn, the pilot is being moved. All of this is being done to a glider with no input by the pilot at all. So that entire sequence right there was simulator induced by the airflow, not by the pilot. I did no control to make that. I rectified it with the joystick. Because I am flying with the joystick, I can't put my hands up and put them on the down tubes and flare. So basically I fly and land on the ground like an airplane on my belly. Well, next up, we're going to step up the realism a little bit. We're going to play around with a little bit of the weather settings, and that's the cloud settings, and see if we can get a little bit more realistic looking flying environment. and TFFE allows us to do that. It's very important in any hang gliding simulator that clouds are represented properly and accurately because, like I said, you're flying outside of the glider, not in the glider, and when you get to altitude, your main point of references are clouds. So if they don't represent properly, you lose that whole ability to navigate and fly outside the glider in high altitude conditions. In this third-person sequence, we see the pilot and the glider moving up and down in concert, and that's actually true. That in an up and down motion, the pilot and the glider always move in unison. It's the roll and pitch that they differ. In this sequence, where a pilot is setting up an approach to the landing zone and trying to judge distance and height and glide, you really get a feel for how the pilot has to be able to look around, change perspective, and manage themselves outside the glider into what's happening to the glider, to the real world. The pilot never looks at the control bar, never looks at his hands, never looks at any visual cues as to what is actually happening. He responds to what he sees and the feedback that he's getting through his hands via the glider as to relative position. This is really difficult to do in virtual reality, with at least with hand controllers. But with joystick, it's pretty simple. Well, next up we step up the level of difficulty, and here we're going to be flying a mountain site in New Zealand, Mount Murchison, and using a higher performance glider, the U2, and we'll see how those differences come into play in a virtual reality simulation. I actually didn't have much luck soaring at Mount Murchison in the U2. I tried 4 or 5 different flights, and none of them I got even above launch. Switched back to the Falcon and easily started out on course and did quite a bit of the task. There's some cool things here in this particular one that I never knew before when I tried to switch on the landing area, what I got were task markers, and so you can see the course, the start, and some turn points visually represented. Very cool. Can't wait to see what can be done with that. Well, to me, this glider, the high-performance glider, seemed to be tuned much too fast. They fly very fast and they turn very slowly, which is true in real life. They do, but not like this. And the gliders that I'm flying with, these artificial intelligent gliders, are high-performance gliders as well. And notice the difference in the performance and their ability to turn as compared to what I'm able to make the U2 do. Well, next I'd like to show you a little progress report on some of the stuff that the Hang Gliding Files has been working on. What you're seeing here is a glider that we've built and some 3D scanned objects that we've put onto Microsoft Flight Simulator, and a site that we've modified so that it is hang gliding friendly. So those windsocks and the telltale that you see, those are all created by us. You can see the point of interest markers that mark the takeoff and landing areas. And that stuff all comes basically for any site that you create a scenery package using the hang gliding files for in Microsoft Simulator. You automatically get windsocks and points of interest. And here's how our current prototype of the glider is looking like in 3D, in virtual reality. So this is all being looked at in virtual reality. We still have some work to do to clean up the glider, but we're getting close to a flying prototype. Now we're just going to take a look around at the what the site looks like in virtual reality. This would be our modified site, so it'd be good to see it from the air. We flattened out roads and basically just made this site look very, very real to the real site. You can see the point of interest marker there for launch. This is the lower launch, so we include multiple launches in a single site. And now we're going to use our in-app widget and teleport ourselves to a non-modified site, but in California, and this will be Lake Elsinore. And this is a site that's just known as a geolocation. It hasn't been modified or updated in any way, shape, or form. It's just raw in Microsoft Flight Simulator, just as a point of reference as to how you can navigate around in Microsoft Flight Simulator to site and what it's going to look like once we get hang gliders flying. All right, like this, like and subscribe. We'll see you later.